Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review Podcast. My name is Josh Rhodes, and today we're talking about TNT Motorsports' event inside Louisville, Kentucky's Freedom Hall in 1987. My co-host for this episode is Doug Welker. Doug does an awesome column on Big Squid RC for solid axle monster truck racing. It's called Monster Truck Madness. You should all check it out, as well as he runs the Trigger King RC Monster Truck series, which is very near and dear to my heart. I want to touch on one thing here really fast before we get into this episode. Episode 2 was supposed to be all about Motor Rock Monster Madness. Unfortunately, when I recorded that episode with Chris Parrish, the audio file was corrupt. We lost the audio file, unable to get it back. So we're moving on. Me and Chris both agreed that instead of re-recording the episode, we want the conversation to feel fresh for you guys. So expect Chris Parrish back on this show very soon. Give him a follow, Mean Duck RC on Facebook as well as Instagram. Also, go give Action Tracks a watch on the Monster Blog YouTube channel. With all that said and the intro done, you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen. Let's fire those engines and get into the Retro Monster Truck Review. Welcome again to the Retro Monster Truck Review, episode number 2 here. My guest this week, Doug Welker. Doug basically runs the Trigger King series, does help with a lot of the Big Squid RC stuff. You also have your own, I believe you told me the other day, a Halloween podcast that you do as well.
Yeah, I do a bunch of stuff. But as it pertains to this, I guess I own Trigger King technically, but I mean, we've got a bunch of guys that actually do everything, within it. You're one of them that helps big time, of course. And I'm the monster truck columnist for BigSquidRC.com. And I guess as it pertains to this too, I have done various stints at Bigfoot before, from 2004 to 2007. And then what was the other, 2010 to 2012. But of course, Bigfoot's pretty involved in Trigger King with some of the guys we run with that. So I feel like always kind of involved somehow with what's going on down there.
Well, either way, through Trigger King, everybody that's there has always been a monster truck fan. That's why we get into it. That's why we love it. And one of our classes, obviously, is the retro class. And we're here at the Retro Monster Truck Review to talk retro monster truck racing. This event, though, Freedom Hall, Kentucky, in Louisville, not the figure eight, to be confused. I had a few people asking me, "Oh, you're going to cover the figure eight?" No.
Well, me too.
Freedom Hall.
When you said let's do Louisville, of course, my mind immediately goes to we're going to go, late era TNT. So this is going to be interesting to talk about this one.
Yeah, this one's a little bit different. This is inside the Freedom Hall. This is the year before we go into the point series with Bigfoot USA 1, just showing off, and Gravedigger really kind of getting together and bringing some awesome television production out there. But this right here is kind of before that, and we kind of see an evolution in TNT right here with this event. We start off on a roller hill, which goes over a set of cars, which ends over another roller hill. And I think this event might be the reason why they don't use that roller hill going forward, because of what happens in round 2. We'll get to that, though. Our lineup, though: Mike Witten, Stomper; Rich Hoosier, Bigfoot 4; Starvin' Marvin Smith and Crimson Giant; Buster Guffey, an awesome name, by the way, Buster Guffey, Modern Day Outlaw; Larry Cook, Texas Toy; John Morin, No Problem 1, by the way, this is the boat; Dale Hancock, Crimson Crusher; Chandler Lloyd in Overtime; John Breen, Mad Dog; Bennett Clark, Clydesdale; Daryl Harris and Casper; and Gold Dust Express is also listed here, but you don't see that truck, unfortunately. It looks like that truck actually goes out, which allows Casper to have a bye in round number 1.
We'll talk about some of the convolutedness of this broadcast. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of it. Maximum Earth-Shaking Power starts us off with the old TNT Motorsports intro. This is classic, Doug. I love this old classic TNT Motorsports intro with the I'm going to call him the narrator.
It's very much a straight man, like it's not the monster truck announcer. It's like, "Hello, I am your father. I am announcing this show to you."
Exactly.
It's like, it's not Steve Evans or the brash in your face monster truck guy.
Exactly. It's not like Army Armstrong's Welcome, where you don't hear Dave Grimm doing his classic "oh"
Yeah,
or anything
whoa!
like that.
No, we'll hear
Just,
plenty of that later.
oh God, yes, we will. Our live events announcers for the evening, by the way, two of the most contrasting styles you are ever going to hear, period. We've got one of the greatest of all time in Army Armstrong, and we've got Dave Grimm, who a lot of it, we all kind of chuckle when we hear that name as far as the old school monster truck guys. But Dave Grimm is, to me, he's still a classic monster truck announcer, but when you're paired with Army Armstrong, not exactly the pairing that you're really looking for here, as far as I'm anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when the old school stuff, and as you keep doing this podcast, which is, I love that you're doing this, by the way. There's so many, like, it's funny when you really look back. There were a good amount of people that sort of did this. You don't remember sometimes some of them. Obviously, Dave Grimm is memorable, but some of them are not memorable. And at least Dave Grimm is memorable. We'll say that. We could get into more of his stuff later. And he does have one of his classic lines in this.
Yeah, he definitely does. Army's booming voice is going to welcome us into Freedom Hall, though. Bigfoot is lining up, and then we hear off to the side, we hear Army say, we're going to hear updates from Don Breitweiser, who is said to be a driver of the famous Bigfoot monster truck. Now, Doug, I don't know if you might know this guy more than me or have ever heard of this guy, but I don't recall of ever hearing this guy broadcasting or excuse me, driving a Bigfoot trucking competition.
So, and I feel bad because I've been in the intro. I was like, oh yeah, I know some Bigfoot, but obviously I wasn't there in the 80s. I do know his name from there, even though, you know, I think I know a decent amount about monster truck history. I don't really know him well, but I do know, especially even from back in the day, people would call there asking for him. So I think just by that metric, he clearly was there. I've heard Jim Kramer talk about him before. Like, he was known. I just don't know, you know, he's not exactly a name synonymous with Bigfoot. Let's put it that way. And especially in this broadcast, he's kind of confusing almost as the guy on the ground. It's like, it feels like a little bit of this production. They were like, hey, can you just help do this? One of these kind of things.
Here's a microphone. Go talk.
Yeah.
So we get into round one right here. They don't show qualifying. We just go straight into round one. And we start off with, probably TNT would build this for maybe a couple of years. It's probably their rivalry. Bigfoot and Stomper. Round number one. We got Mike Witt and Rich Hoosier here. Rich has always been, to me, kind of the unsung hero at Bigfoot as far as driving goes. He's got Bigfoot number 4 here, and it's a classic look for Bigfoot 4. It's one I've tried to replicate on my RC truck for a number of years now, just to try to get it right. And every now and then I'll hit a little detail like, oh, I want that, and I put that under the truck and stuff like that. But anyway,
this is iconic. Yeah, this is an iconic.
This is the iconic look for Bigfoot 4. Stomper, this is kind of, I believe they just got Stomper Bully repainted. Is that right?
It's around
this is Stomper Bully repainted it on 66s. So,
yep. And I guess TNT owns Stomper. Did they own Stomper at this? Okay, yeah, that's right.
Yes, they own Stomper at this point because it's that classic, and honestly, classic yellow Stomper with a little bit of the red accent with the name on the side. Just, it's a cool looking truck. It's too bad it never really could translate to the racetrack for Stomper.
Yeah, it never did. And I think that as we get into this, when they talk about the rivalry, it was a rivalry in as much as, scissors and rock are a rivalry in paper, rock, scissors.
Exactly. I believe there was a few times I'd heard in different TNT broadcasts that they try to say Stomper is the number 1 Chevrolet truck in the country, and I'm just hearing a guy in Minnesota just tapping his foot like, okay, really?
Yeah, I mean, hey, they have to do, like, that's what a lot of this show, which I loved watching this one, but it's funny that this era of TNT early, which is obviously the earliest, just feels drastically different from even a year later. It's like the beta test in a lot of ways. It feels like the production on the TV show is kind of crazy and rushed here. Like at the beginning, there's no real, it looks like you're just dumped into the arena while stuff is just going on. And that's kind of confusing from a broadcast perspective,
It's kind of confusing from a fan perspective too.
Yeah.
You walk in, you're like, oh, there's a pulling track and there's a monster truck track, but you don't really understand what's going on between them. And you're going to hear a lot throughout this entire broadcast where the monster truck announcers are talking about, oh, he's going to go to the final. Okay, you said that 6 times. Who's going to the final?
I think I heard that, and I remember we have some notes, pre-notes show show notes here, and I think whenever because I watched it right before we were on here again. I've seen this show many times over the years, of course, this broadcast.
As have I, but I've also watched this show the last couple of days as well, just to refresh my memory on everything.
Sure, and when you're ready to, we're going to do a show like this, that's when I was like, okay, I really need to brush up on this. It seems like they're more just trying to hype up, like every truck could go to the finals. I think that's. I think
this
that's
guy can go to the final. This guy.
I think that's what they're more doing here versus just out of order rounds for the most part. Yeah. But there's just a lot of like the Bigfoot and Stomper thing here. It's kind of just the hyping of it, right? They're trying to just make it sound like it, because boy, you look back here and you look even a year later in TNT, and even though the trucks are sort of the same era, I guess they're really not, because you're talking, these are stage 1 trucks pretty much.
Yeah.
It seems like.
I don't know. You can almost say Bigfoot's right at the edge of stage 1 with 4 here.
Well, I think if you're trying to imply that's kind of a stage 2, I think that's the case. Bigfoot 4 is such a different vehicle.
Yes.
It feels like the caliber of truck than these other ones, and that's where TNT would go on to have great drama in the racing.
Oh, yes.
And we can talk Mad Dog here in a minute. I'll save some of these points for Mad Dog, because Mad Dog does feel like a different truck in this lineup too.
Yes, it does.
It feels like a different
seems
caliber.
Like it's a little bit ahead of his time. You could also say Crimson Crusher kind of as well, but we'll get to that race here in a little bit.
Yeah.
This race right here, Bigfoot is just so smooth. I don't believe that Mike Witt even had a chance. Foot is smooth over the hill. That's where Bigfoot's going to win a lot of races here, is over that hill at the very start. Stomper launches it. Foot nice, low, and then launches it over the cars.
Yep.
And it almost seems like Hoosier's out of the throttle after he lands off the cars and just kind of coasts over the hill, because he knows that Witt's going to kind of back off. He's behind at this point. It seems like every race that Bigfoot wins, he goes straight to the tunnel. Like he doesn't even want to stop, wave to the crowd, anything. Just land, boom, over the hill, straight to the tunnel.
I know. It's a very business-like. This is a very business-like or workman-like thing with Bigfoot. And I agree on Rich Hoosier, by the way, that, it's not that he's not thought of as a classic Bigfoot driver. He is, but he doesn't really, he doesn't get the fanfare of like a Kramer or Brass. He was unfortunately stuck, kind of stuck in between there, but he did a lot of TNT driving.
He did a lot of TNT. He did some USHRA, one of my more favorite events that I'm going to cover on this podcast soon, Minneapolis 88,
which is a great one. That's a great one. It's an all-timer.
That's a great race, but he dominates that race. I mean, I've watched that. That's probably the event that I wore out the most when I was a kid, because that was was on the VHS tape. Hoosier just dominates that race, just like he's going to dominate here. I'm going to spoil it, but
I don't think we're spoiling anybody who's listening to this podcast. Probably has a
pretty good idea who's going to win this race
of old school monster trucks, and knows that generally this first year of Bigfoot, it was a beatdown pretty much almost every one of these. There was
always a blue truck, it seemed like, in the final, and probably winning at this point. Next round, though, we've got Crimson Giant here, Marvin Smith, modern day outlaw. Again, probably the greatest name in early monster trucks, Buster Guffey. I just love that. Huge hole shot by Marvin here in the Crimson Giant, and called expertly by Army Armstrong, if I might add. Giant really has a picture-perfect pass, staying nice and low to the ground, low over the cars, low over that last hill, and he just kind of blows Buster away here.
Yep. Again, felt like a different caliber of truck. Marvin Smith,
exactly.
Was a little bit, I don't think Crimson Giant wasn't really, I don't know if ahead of the time's the right word, but it was definitely one of the better trucks of the era. I'd say it that way, and he's a good driver.
Oh, yeah. That's part of the reason I think that they kind of recruited him as Stomper 2. With Mike Witt having Stomper 1 and this truck coming along and eventually becoming Stomper 2, it made a lot of sense for Marvin to kind of take on the role of the TNT TV star, which he would later become. You wouldn't see much of Mike Witt in TNT broadcasting. You would definitely see Marvin Smith, though, because he had the personality as well. Marvin Smith is another guy that's kind of an unsung hero in monster trucks. He always had that grin on his face, too, in an interview. After he'd finish it up, you'd see that little grin, like, okay, Marvin's got something up his sleeve. But I think that's part of the reason Army wanted to give him a strong nickname, like he gave most of the guys, it seemed like, on the tour a different kind of nickname or a different way to refer to them so people could identify with them.
Yeah, give them personality. Yep,
exactly.
He was trying to give them personality for sure.
Texas Toy and no problem here right now, but this race, Doug, I got to tell you, honestly, I would have called it different as far as who was going to win this, because the way I remembered Texas Toy back in the day was there was no low end, but plenty of top end on Texas Toy. No Problem seemed like it was just in that perfect middle ground to be able to do this type of track very easily. However, Texas Toy kind of makes this look like a blowout.
It does make it look easy. And actually, it's funny, this event, Texas Toy does quite well here, we'll just say.
Yes.
And I don't really, the same thing, my memories are skewed of Texas Toy, where I don't really remember a lot of it running, I guess, or racing. And most of when I do, it was like a one and done, it felt like. But it looks pretty good here with the long wheelbase. And I always forget, too, how short that first Bronco was.
Oh yeah, that first Bronco reminds me a lot of people that would watch modern day monster trucks would look at the Rockstar truck. That really short wheelbase truck. That's what No Problem is here. And this No Problem, by the way, is also a registered marine craft as well as a boat. There were a few events I remember seeing a propeller on the back of this, just a little small propeller, like they're making a joke out of it.
Yeah, like on the hitch or something, his cover, something like that. I remember that too. Yeah, kind of that's all there really is to say on this one. It's
now there's one more thing to say, and that's that Dave Grimm analogy that probably started this whole thing. Well, Army, Texas Toy had no problem beating No Problem. Thank you, Dave Grimm, for such wonderful announcing right there and bringing that up. We get a little bit of a break in the action, and we get a chance to meet Don Breitweiser for the first time. He gives us a little bit of information that's going on here, states that Bigfoot and Stomper is one of the biggest rivalries in the monster truck business. I would say he's right for TNT. I would not say he's right for the entire business, because at this time, Bigfoot, Barefoot, Bigfoot USA 1, even Bigfoot and Gravedigger at this
point. Or the Kongs. I mean,
Bigfoot and Kong. Yes. I mean, I rate every one of those above Bigfoot and Stomper. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you don't really think of it much, but it makes sense. And I know that when there's Chevy backing and everything, it does. And they kind of got to play it up. Absolutely realize it. I just, again, even as a kid who grew up in St. Louis, I don't remember much of that at all being a rivalry, at the time.
I honestly, this is the first time I'd ever even heard them say that, oh, this is one of the greatest rivalries in motorsports. I disagree. I think it's, I think
it's just hyping.
It's a good Chevrolet truck and the best Ford truck. That's what it is.
Yes, I would agree.
Crimson Crusher up next versus Overtime. We've got Chandler Lloyd here in Overtime. I really always thought this was an underrated truck. I always loved the look of Overtime. Crimson Crusher, though, is taking it a complete different route tire-wise. We've seen 73-inch tires to this point. We've seen 66-inch Goodyears to this point. Now we've got Dooley, Rice, and Canes on Crimson Crusher here against these guys, which is a complete different route that a lot of people probably wouldn't go, but it really worked on Crimson Crusher. It may have added a little bit more weight to the truck, but still, I mean, it really worked for Dale Hancock here.
It was, and I think we should probably reserve some of the talk to the next round, I believe it is, for Crimson Crusher, when the iconic thing happens. But I think that this tire choice was smart because there were so many other trucks back then. The Crusher wasn't necessarily wildly different construction-wise.
It made it stand out, too. It really made it stand out.
It did, and, it was a very well done truck, even for the era, as far as, we're kind of in the era where the paint jobs really matter and everything, and even the axles and everything were all painted to match, and it looked really sharp. But those gold wheels, the gold wheels with the dual tractors, those were, again, I say iconic. I know it's not necessarily an iconic monster truck, but something important with Crimson Crusher is I remember there was a poster of it available at the book fair as a kid. And you can Google his picture, and it's there for Crimson Crusher. And it's funny that it probably doesn't happen if it's just a regular truck with 66s. It's just funny that's just one of those things I remember that was one of you could find it at book fairs. A lot of kids would see it that way.
That's one of the things that, at least in this era, that you wanted to do was stand out and really catch a kid's eye. Dave Grimm's at it again, though. Here he goes, "Where's our Chevrolet fans?" And then just repeats the word Chevy. You gotta love his announcing was different and made him stand out. That's why we still remember his name. Speaking of standing out, anyway, Crimson Crusher. They say he goes nuts here over this track, and he certainly does. Dale Hancock puts it to the wood right here to try to get past.
He does, and
he's gone from Overtime and Chandler Lloyd.
This really, watching this event, I know what happens in the next round, but it reminded me of or surprised me, I guess, in how quick the Crusher actually was. He drove it really
Yes.
hard.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that might have been one of the first races that Dale Hancock had attended, and he probably really wanted to try and prove that truck's worth.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see him going out here and doing this, and really pushing this truck, which we find out that he does.
He does. He
Mad Dog
YOLO'd
and
it.
Mad Dog and Clydesdale is next. Mad Dog representing Chevrolet, the camp of Missouri. John Breen, one of the classic names in monster trucks. We hear every now and then people just randomly say his name or his brother Bob's name just because, you know what? They're catchy names.
Yeah, the Breen boys.
Oh, yeah. We see Bennett Clark coming out of the tunnel. The original Clydesdale, just it's a plain looking truck. There's really not much to talk about on the original Clydesdale. It just looks like a big jacked up truck on 66s and just has the name Clydesdale on the side. Whereas Mad Dog, this truck is unique in the sense that it's almost scary that it's legal to compete with the way the top of the truck is configured. It's just a halo style roll cage directly over John Breen's head with a wing on top of it.
It's radical. I mean, this truck really looks radical, especially it would go on to be radical looking even with TNT, that, you know, the different version of the truck, the blue chassis. But it's still, I mean, even today it looks radical. Like for the era, it's pretty crazy what this truck looks like. It looks like it would be very ahead of things.
Yes, and it certainly was, as far as suspension wise goes. At this time, the Breens could make a truck at this era run extremely well. There are other events, and I personally, when I was growing up, I'd never seen Mad Dog win an entire event. But if you look back, there are a couple of events out there where you can watch John Breen just absolutely obliterate the bracket and go through these guys like they're nothing. And like he's created a truck here that is capable of keeping up with Bigfoot. And I think throughout this event, they do talk about how, well, you know, Mad Dog and Bigfoot in the finals. When he meets Bigfoot in the finals, they mention it several times when John Breen's on screen that, by God, he's going to go to the final. But anyway, not to spoil anything here. 24 shock absorbers, by the way, on Clydesdale. That had to be some kind of a record at the time.
Yeah, that was astronomical. Crazy how much what it had under it.
Off the line, huge advantage for Breen. He rolls the hill and then launches over the crush cars just like Bigfoot does. Something to keep in mind, though, Breen's doing this in the right lane. Bigfoot was doing this in the left lane. So you knew Breen almost had to know at the time, okay, Bigfoot's TQ, I'm going to have to get used to this other lane.
Yeah, and again, this race, whenever you watch it, it's just Mad Dog kind of shoots out. Again, Mad Dog visually looks like one of the fastest vehicles here on this evening.
Yes, it does. And the finish line shows it whenever he's wild. It's almost a precursor to what happens in that lane in the next round.
I mean, it is.
With him.
It is. This is the better way it could have gone.
Exactly. We get an interesting call from Dave Grimm on the finish line after the race. Says that Mad Dog almost went over if he would have had their second accident here tonight, which is a mystery to me because at this point we've not seen another accident in this show.
Yeah,
I don't know if he's foreshadowing or if he can see in the future or what here as far as what's going to happen, but I don't recall there being another accident unless he's maybe speaking of a pulling event that we didn't see.
To me, this sounded like a production gaffe. Like, I don't know how this was recorded. I would assume they weren't just doing live commentary. They came to a booth after and did something over on the tape.
Yeah.
I don't know. The production on this is very confusing.
Yeah.
On how they
yes.
did these races, to where it sounds like live. Some of it's live, you know, off the live event mics, but some of it also
sounds like they went back to the studio and
did some overdubs
microphones to make it sound like an event mic.
Yeah, and so I don't know if he just kind of screwed up in saying that, knowing what was going to happen here, or what the deal was. But I thought that was interesting too, whenever he did say that, because nothing is shown on TV
as far as another wreck happening.
Yeah, it's just
maybe a truck getting in the wall or something like that. You don't hear that in the monster trucks.
Yeah.
Round number 2 here, though. This is the round that we're going to be speaking a lot of right now. Bigfoot, Crimson Giant. Army miscalls this at the beginning. A very rare mistake for Army Armstrong, I might say, calling this the semifinals, when in fact there's really 6 of 12 trucks remaining here. Bigfoot in the left lane, obviously number 1 qualifier. He's got the choice of which lane that he wants to go to. And as we said earlier with Bigfoot, he wins a race, he goes straight to the tunnel, and that doesn't stop him right here. That's what Rich Hoosier does. perfect launch over the hill. It's this classic style Bigfoot run over the hill, launches the cars, and then just casually glides over the hill at the end and goes straight to the tunnel and probably beats Marvin here by, I would say, at least 2 truck lengths.
Yeah, this is a beatdown race. And again, as Rich gets more comfortable with this, you know, the track here, and Bigfoot 4 handles this really well, this track.
One thing to note here too, now that I'm kind of really thinking about this, that right lane had to be pretty scary for these guys, because you had a pulling lane to the far left, then you had a monster truck race lane, and then a monster truck race lane inside Louisville Freedom Hall. I've been to Freedom Hall. It's not that wide of a facility.
Let's talk about that, because they don't really show the pulling track, but you can see it's off to the side. And my understanding of Freedom Hall, which, by the way, they do the big National Farm Show, Machinery Show Championship Tractor Pull every February normally. It's a small place. I've always heard it's a tiny place. So the fact that they have, you know, a pulling track and the 2 monster truck tracks, it looks bigger in there just because they have the 3 things laid out. But as far as I know, the real estate of the place is tiny. So you're right. That right lane, you don't have much freedom as a driver. You're right there at the crowd.
I think as fast as you're going to go in that right lane was demonstrated by John Breen in the previous round, when he really put that truck to the test in that right lane, and I don't think he liked it very much at all.
Definitely not at the end of it.
Yeah, definitely not at the end of it. It seems like his head was just going every which way in that cockpit. Next race though, Texas Toy and Casper. You couldn't get 2 more different trucks right here. We've got a giant Toyota on 73-inch tires and a really long wheelbase Ford diesel truck on 66s. That's probably the longest wheelbase for the era,
and probably the tallest in the era.
Probably
one of them. I mean,
I don't know about Duraliner. You had Samson 1 and Duraliner that were probably height wise a little taller, but length wise, Texas Toy has still probably got quite a few trucks covered to this day.
Even the modern, you know, the rebuilt Texas Toy today, which is one of the best looking trucks brought back, is I mean, it looks super long now. It's still compared to the other trucks that are back, you know, brought back.
I just saw a video of that truck crushing cars here a little while ago, and it's really awesome to see a truck from this era that we all know kind of just fell on hard times and was just ran in somebody's, I want to say, their field for quite some time, just as a play toy, get restored into a really quality piece that probably is going to end up at the International Monster Truck Museum and Hall of Fame.
It has to.
It has to be there for at least the Hall of Fame inductions, just to be there surrounded by some of the trucks that it competed against back in the day. That would be really cool to see. One thing, though, I got to say, they pick on John Moore again here. I can't understand why you got to pick on poor little John Moore. Texas Toy rolled over no problem with no problem.
Got to go to that pun.
They got to go to that well one more time for that joke, I guess. We pick up here. We got to pick on John Moore. I still don't understand why. Anyway, I really don't agree with that they called Casper untested. Dale had to still make a clean legal pass to bring this truck into this round.
Yep.
Granted, he probably did a slower legal pass than normal just to save equipment, but he's not untested. He has a familiarity on this course, and he proves it right here. Texas Toy, as we've stated, slow off the line, picks up on the top end, and by the end of this race, yes, Casper jumps out to an early lead, but here comes Texas Toy right at the line, and almost, if there's another 10 feet added to that line, Texas Toy nips him.
Yeah, and something else I wanted to say with this, because it just reminded me with the no problem thing. First off, this was a good race, and it was a good old school race, I think.
Yes.
Really entertaining, especially with 2 trucks that are wildly different. It seemed like, as far as the big tall trucks go, racing-wise, that Casper was a pretty good truck for, you know, normally the 73-inch trucks they're not exactly known for being speed demons out there.
For some reason, his truck, it seemed like it did have quite a bit of speed to match the truck's look.
Yeah,
it's another one that's unique out there. It's a Toyota. You know, we don't have many Toyotas in this era at all.
Something else funny with that too is that some of the other big trucks maybe looked a little bit better put together. And what I mean by that, you know, Casper is a cool looking old school truck, but it does kind of look, I don't know what the word is here. It doesn't look as well engineered as like a Samson.
No,
or even like Duraline or Giant, but
it looks like a Shade Tree Mechanics truck with an awesome paint job.
it does. And the funny part, though, is it seemed to run well, though, for what it was. And I would think in a race, I would take it over those other two, which were probably more mechanically put together.
I agree.
Looking wise, Casper wasn't much of a looker. It was more of a runner, even though, of course, I do think it looks cool, especially we talked about.
I mean, any truck on 73s to me looks cool.
Yes.
This is one of them. This is probably at the time the world's tallest Toyota.
Well, remember, too, that roll bar on the back looks crazy with all those bars and that light blue, and it looks like a ramp on the back of it. Like it's a pretty wild looking roll bar for it. So before this next race, which we're going to spend a lot of time on of this, one thing I did want to say here was in my notes that before each round, when they're trying to hype up stuff, it shows the guys driving out of the tunnel.
Yeah.
This track looks like it was a real pain in the butt to get trucks staged up on, especially you had trucks that didn't have the good four-wheel steer, a lot of them at this time. I don't even know if they all had four-wheel steer. And it looks like this event probably took forever to get the truck staged because there just wasn't much room.
I think, too, being there's a pulling track that you don't quite see off to the right-hand side, I can imagine some of those guys back there that are pulling, see those monster trucks coming out of the tunnel. They want them absolutely nowhere near that pulling track. They don't want those Terra tires touching their surface. I can imagine they've got to hug that white line going all the way down there and then try and curve in to 45 it on the line. And there's actually, now that you bring that up, there was a couple instances where it looked like some trucks were launching off the line with their tires still turned like they were backing in.
Yeah, that's it looked like it messed with the races too, because you had non-self center rear steer where I've got to mess with that before in driving Bigfoot 1, to where you just have to stick your head out the window and just kind of, it might look straight, but until you go forward, then you realize, oh, it's not quite straight. Yeah. And so that it affected the competition, I think, and also the night of the event. I'm sure it just took forever to get trucks lined up there for a quick race, but it was just something to note. It looked like it was a major effort because you also had the sled on the other side. So even if you couldn't be on the track, you definitely can't go over the sled, which was staged down by the starting line. So it's just something interesting to note that I thought it just looked like it was super tight and it was hard to get those trucks staged in.
Yeah, it definitely was. And that goes back to the point I made about the right lane too. I mean, it's so tight right there. It almost makes you think that they had to line the trucks up in the right lane before they could the left lane. But I don't think they did that. I think they probably just lined up whoever got out there first.
Yeah, same. Probably.
Speaking though, next race is probably, at least to me, and I know I might get a little flack for this, to me, this is the race of 1987. This is the tightest race that you're going to see on this tight of a course. Mad Dog Crimson Crusher. This race is really remembered here for what happens at the end of the track. But for me and a lot of other guys, probably yourself as well, it's more remembered for that iconic shot of those two trucks side by side over the cars coming to the finish line.
Yeah, it's like, again, it's a great race. This is as entertaining as a small layout in the late 80s is ever going to be. And as somebody who attended event, I mean, I was really young back then in 87. Okay, I was three or four, depending when this one actually took place. But still, this style was that way for a few years. And I remember going to the small arenas like this. And now people look back at how boring it, some younger people maybe think it was boring, but even this is entertaining to watch this race, even from the lens of modern, where we're used to trucks backflipping and all kinds of crazy stuff, because the competition is good. You can tell both of these guys are running these trucks as hard as they will go. And it's just a great race. And again, you do see that shot on all the promo material of the trucks flying over, ignoring the end, which is exciting in and of itself. It's it's a classic race. And again, from back then, in 87, I don't know if there were a lot of candidates for your best race necessarily.
There might have been USHRA wise. One of Colby Marshall, somebody has helped me out with this podcast quite a bit, has told me he really enjoys Houston 87 with Bigfoot and Barefoot in the final.
Okay, that's
a really good race. But to me, there is nothing that beats this side by side finish that we have here. And what adds to it is the fact that at the end, spoiler alert here, Crimson Crusher endos straight over and just obliterates.
It's one of the great. Awesome this truck. Is one of the great accidents in monster truck history in this race. And Houston was great. But Houston was in the Astrodome, and there was room.
They had plenty of room to do what they had there. This is in the confines of Louisville, Kentucky's Freedom Hall.
Yes, it's tiny, and that's where it's special to get that entertaining. So finally, the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the ending here, because this is one of the. I mean, this was used in so much promotional material.
Oh yeah.
Arguably, Crimson Crusher is famous because of this. I mentioned the book, the book fair thing too. That picture was out there and the look of it, but this really put the stamp, and this is like why this truck is really. There's a couple little things. It's funny for a truck that really didn't do a lot of things. It's remembered fondly, and this is one of the reasons it is for this.
Oh yeah. One thing here I want to point out: the difference between Army Armstrong and Dave Grimm. Right here, you hear Dave Grimm in his classic "Oh, call," and he goes, "There it is." That's all you hear out of Dave Grimm right there. But you hear Army immediately go serious, and he immediately says, "Be advised, we need no cigarettes in the area. No cigarettes in the area."
That line, I mean, that's crazy line.
You can definitely tell this is definitely the 80s right here.
Yeah, to have the track officials smoking cigarettes, make sure you stay away from it because there's racing.
No cigarettes in the area. And then he turns around and says, okay, it looks like Dale Hancock is all right. This is motorsports, ladies and gentlemen. Hancock gets out, and you see Don Breitweiser and Marvin Smith at his side. Marvin looks incredibly concerned for Dale here.
Mm-hmm. We didn't even say really, I guess, completely what happens. I guess we should, it does endo.
Yes.
But it's the way that rear end catches that hill.
Yeah, what really killed him right here was the launch, and this can go right at the ending of the launch, or excuse me, the landing off the cars, because the rear is kind of doing one of those bouncing, hopping things.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a similar accident with Stomper as well. I forget the event off the top of my head, but I do remember Stomper catching the backside of that hill in a real weird rear end bounce.
Yep.
Endoing and just slowly rolling over, just almost exactly like Crimson Crusher does right here.
Yep, it's that rear end catch when you get the rear bounces and you hit it. It's like it's the worst kind of thing, and they'll kick it over. And yeah, this it looks crazy, and I understand why Marvin Smith was concerned, because it looks like the whole top is crushed on the truck. Yes. It's really amazing that we didn't really have like the fatalities with some, like you think of Kramer's famous thing in Indianapolis.
That's still to me the scariest end over end rollover of all time. People will compare it to this. You can't really compare it because Kramer's doing a lot quicker of a speed, and he's in two-wheel drive. He's launching, landing, and the truck just it's still hard to.
I remember talking to Julie, Jim's wife. Because over the years, just kind of BS, because Kramer's done and seen everything. He's like the best story in monster truck racing ever. Like his stories, man, what he forgets is better than most. Yeah. And the Indy race is looked at very scary because of that and how that cab went. You're talking the speed. The one thing I'll say though, and Dale actually, I don't want to jump the gun here, but in the interview afterwards, when he's there on the ground, he's talking, and he said that he was concerned with the fans. The one thing that this was dangerous for, Indy had the room. You were in the RCA dome, and there wasn't the danger of like hitting the fans necessarily because you had all that room. Had he could have gotten out of this had he powered down.
If he powered down, he's getting out of this. Problem is there's a wall right there.
Yes, and he could have jumped up. The way these trucks are, he could have jumped up. It could have done the Don Van Leeuw bad medicine, where it was a severe the hit. But the way that there were people there, and it was just interesting to hear that even during that he was cognizant of it. Mm-hmm. That he knew he had a finite amount of real estate. He had to get this thing shut down. And he realized he lost his chance to save it right there.
Exactly.
It was interesting.
As far as safety wise, though, you're speaking that, I'm going to speak on the actual safety that he was wearing at the time, which was none at all. He had a t-shirt on. He had a t-shirt on with Crimson Crusher on it. He had a black neck brace and jeans and tennis shoes. That was it. That's early day monster truck racing for you. And he's out there, and you got to think too, at this point, even NASCAR drivers have fire suits on. These guys are out there running in bare minimum. And it's hard to believe that as unprotected as he looks, he still ran the truck as hard as he did.
I know, it's fearless. And I guess, back then, a lot of these accidents hadn't happened yet. which is why even a year later you see the safety just
Yeah.
look real. That's why this 87 is so kind of wild. It's like a Wild West where
it's definitely the Wild West. One thing he says is he believes the roll bar helped him out some in this rollover. I don't think it did at all.
it didn't even look like it did anything. The whole cab
it didn't do anything. It collapsed immediately as it hit the ground. One thing he says in the interview too, I found interesting, was he just got a roll cage. He just literally picked it up the day before this event, didn't have time to weld it in.
Yeah,
I bet he wishes he had time to weld that in, looking at what happened at this event.
Yeah, it's crazy, especially, with that hill at the end there, because this almost happens to Mad Dog. It's funny, we talked about how Mad Dog in a round before this had kind of the same thing, but he powered out of it and could get out of it and had a little more room.
Well, honestly, I think when Mad Dog did it, the front tires are clearly on the ground after the hill. When Crusher does it, he hits so hard with that rear end. I don't think he even realizes he's gonna endo until he's literally looking down at the ground. Before he's like, "Oh, crap!" And then he has to hit the brakes. I don't think he even realized where he was on the floor until he started to go up, and then he realized fans are right there. I can't really power out, so that's when you see him hit the brakes and the truck just fall over.
Yep, agreed. I mean, so it's, again, that was used in a lot of promotional material and everything. It's a classic monster truck race.
Exactly, and still, to me, like I said, the race of '87. We get to the semifinals now with Casper and Bigfoot, Mississippi, St. Louis, Toyota, Ford. Casper stands much taller than Bigfoot 4 right here. You see a racing monster truck for the time versus a truck that you wouldn't expect to be as fast as it is, being a racing monster truck at the time. Casper is not backing off over the hill. Bigfoot, though, shows where the advantage is in the suspension under Bigfoot 4, launches the cars, and again, launches the cars, seems like he gets out of the throttle, just kind of rolls over the hill and goes right to the pits.
Just moves on down the line.
Like you said earlier, business as usual for Bigfoot right here, taking out Casper. What's interesting in the next race, though, Mad Dog and the fastest loser, Texas Toy. This might have been one of the first times you saw a fast loser actually score a win to go into another round. Albeit controversial fashion.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about that part of it, but it is a surprise too. And actually, it's funny watching this event again. I forgot Texas Toy and Bigfoot. Well, we're talking about who won, but I was confused. I actually thought Mad Dog won this. Like I was actually surprised watching this, despite having seen this. It's been a little while since I've seen this event. I was surprised at what happened here. Actually, I just don't. Yeah.
Well, to explain what happens, Mad Dog comes out. He sits on the line for a little while, and apparently they're waiting for Texas Toy to fire in the pits and come out. So John does what anybody would do in the situation while they're waiting on their competitor. He just shuts the truck off. Problem is, it doesn't refire. Mad Dog has the lane that it wants. It has every advantage going for it. Problem is as soon as Texas Toy comes out to run the race, they can't fire Mad Dog. I don't know how much time they're giving here in between. They don't really specify how much time he's given to refire or how much time it took Texas Toy to get out there, but Mad Dog doesn't refire, and you see Texas Toy makes a slow little pass just to advance into the next round, and then right before the finals, you see they're still moving Mad Dog off the track as Bigfoot's coming out.
Yep, it was, and that's what I don't even remember this part. I guess that's why I don't remember much about this part of it when I've watched it previously, because I remember the round before it is kind of the big one that you remember from the race. And yeah, to me, he got jobbed here because, if this was a race, I'm sorry, if you were betting on who's going to win this race, I mean,
yeah, John Breen's going to walk away from Texas Toy. Texas Toy would still be hitting the crush cars as Mad Dog is pulling around to come for the final against Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I think
that's how that race was going to go.
No, it was. And what we talked about earlier about the place being tight and hard to get the truck staged factored into this, I'm sure, because you had what I'm guessing
too. You think too. We pointed out earlier, Texas Toy has the longest wheelbase of any truck there, and he has to fit in the tightest turning spot to get into the lane that he's going to be into, which is the right lane. Mad Dog's already lined up in the left lane waiting on him. He turns the truck off so it doesn't overheat, and then all of a sudden can't refire.
Yep. It was a screwy situation, and the venue contributed to it. And I'm sure, I'm guessing, with the fastest loser, probably he took time getting out there because he wasn't sitting by the truck or something. He had lost and probably was thinking that's it. And again, this is conjecture, or just kind of I was just thinking maybe how it went down, but reasonable. I think reasonable assumption for some of this. It's how it went down. But yeah, this was a gift, and really, it should have been I don't know what you say here, really, I guess, because if the truck doesn't fire, but it shouldn't have been that much time given if the other guy's on the line, probably.
Exactly. And I think that's something that they nailed down within the next couple of years for TNT.
Yep.
Was the time limit. We get to the finals, though. 2 big blue Fords, Texas Toy and Bigfoot. One thing I actually rewatched the final of this just before we started recording, and I couldn't believe what I heard. I had to go back and rewind it just a little bit, and I hear Army say that Jeff Jarrett and Big Bubba are up in the t-shirt stand for autographs. For those that don't know, Jeff Jarrett, pro wrestling, legendary pro wrestler. Big Bubba, who would later go on to become the big boss man in WWF and had quite a run there. You and I are both wrestling fans. That I barely caught him say that, and I'm like, wow, okay.
I didn't hear that.
I don't know if that was the first really instance between the crossings of the motorsports right there. Or the motorsport and wrestling.
Until you told me this right before we went on air here too, I didn't pick that part up. I never heard that. That's funny.
Like I said, I've watched this millions of times, and I did not catch that until I watched it a little bit earlier.
That's funny. Yeah, it's funny.
And then we get another classic Dave Grimmism. I'm going to start calling him Grimmisms. Every time he's featured on this podcast, it's a Grimmism when he talks. You know what they say, Army, F-O-R-D. It's a 4-letter word. Thank you for taking us back to kindergarten, Dave Grimm. F-O-R-D stands for first on race day. I think we can all, there might be a few people out there that disagree with that, me as a Chevrolet fan included.
Yep. We didn't really talk about it to the Dave Grimm, that whole funny thing with the, how many of you don't care? I'm just, just to the party. That's one of his iconic lines that he says.
How many of you guys don't care and just want to party?
And that's very audible on tape. It's funny that he's just screaming it. It's just funny. And it probably says how long it took for that round to happen.
Exactly.
He's trying to keep him going.
I can imagine the announcers at this show, it's especially towards the end of this bracket, were just, as a person that's worked with Monster Jam, whenever there's downtime, we're literally just sitting there twiddling our thumbs and going, all right, fill time,
Mm-hmm.
trying to think of ways to keep the crowd interjected and entertained in the event. This had to be one of the first instances where they had to do that. And, honestly, I hate to say it, but Dave Grimm's probably one of the better guys at the time to be able to do so with his crazy voice, because he has a voice for broadcasting. He really does. He's
amped up.
He reminds me of a presidential candidate a few years ago. Howard Dean, I think, was his name, where he grabs the microphone and he just goes, yeah!
Oh, yeah.
He reminds me of that guy a lot.
It was, he's very much like that. But yeah, and his whole thing before is funny with the Fords and the 4-letter word and everything, trying to get people hyped. I'm sure it was exhausting by the end of the night for these announcers, though, with all the downtime.
I can definitely imagine. Army's there for the long haul, though, and he's right on it as well when he describes the starting line as may the best Ford win.
Mm-hmm.
He also says that this looks like the Hill Street Blues right here, 2 Fords in the final.
Army's just the best. He adds such, when you have the craziness of Dave Grimm, or even Army's been paired with a bunch of other people, he adds such a an authenticity to the race. Like, he makes it seem like it's a bigger deal than it always is. He knows what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. And it's just, he does.
One of the things that he said a few years ago, I was at an event that he covered at Eldora Speedway for Monster Truck Challenge. And they had like an open, which I thought was cool. Rich Schaefer did at the time. He had an open discussion with the fans at intermission.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the fans, I don't know how they picked this guy, but he seemed like he kind of knew the sport a little bit. And I don't remember his name, but he asked Army what he thought of this event versus what this fan believed as the rigged events that are put on by another promoter.
Yeah,
they're not rigged. Trust me, I worked them.
Yeah. But, so what did he say?
That's what the guy asked. That's what I remember him asking Army.
Mm-hmm.
Army said, listen, if you see this face, it's a race, pointing to himself. And that is 100% true with Army Armstrong. If you see his face here, it's a race, and he makes it a race. His broadcasting ability, the way that he described things, his ability to bring in a different analogy for every event is what makes him the great, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest, not only live event announcer, but greatest monster truck announcer we've ever had.
I don't know how one could really have an argument against that, a strong argument, because Scott Douglas is great, but I think Scott Douglas himself would say Army is the guy. And
I believe Scott said that on his own podcast.
That he, again, monster truck racing in its infancy, Army was just there on the mic for a lot of the things, and he made so many, the great analogies, and just with the gunfight, always his analogy with the gunfighting, very much like drag racing. He's doing the same thing, because I mean that's really what it was. You got the one-on-one elimination racing, but he injected drama in a spot where maybe there wasn't a lot of drama before. He was just a good storyteller with it and got people amped up. And his interviews were great too, because he was very to the point, I guess.
Yes.
And he just always knew what to say.
He wanted to get the point across. But he also wanted it to be an entertaining point.
Yes.
To keep the crowd invested into it. And I think that's why a lot of us grew up to feel like we were more knowledgeable about these trucks back in the day, because we had somebody like Army that really pushed the knowledge of the trucks into our heads. We don't really get that nowadays.
No. And there have been some admirable attempts to sort of do that, but I feel like nobody's ever really got it right. No, there's been, people are too dry or sometimes a little too over the top. Nobody really gets it like Army, or did get it like Army. I don't think that's nostalgia talking either. I think
that's not nostalgia talking. That's 100% fact. Just like what Army Armstrong would preach every time he was on the track.
Yeah, it was great. And growing up in that era, always him on TV, it's the same. A lot of my love of monster trucks comes from Army Armstrong and teaching, a little kid and bringing some of the rivalry stuff up. Some of it wasn't completely there. I wouldn't say he manufactured it, but he tried to put a little bit more.
He manufactured it, but he sure knew how to sell it.
Exactly. What was there he could sell well. Yeah. He was great. Army Armstrong was great, and he's the greatest of all time. And that's one of the nice things about you doing this podcast, is you're going to get a lot of Army Armstrong.
Oh yeah, he's one of the main reasons I wanted to do it, just for some of the Army Armstrong isms out there.
Yeah, that
are just waiting to be discovered by some fan that might stumble across this, that's more into what we see currently nowadays.
Yep.
Final round though, here we got Texas Toy and Bigfoot 4. Texas Toy, known for, like I said, to be the top end truck. It's going to be the trucks that's there at the finish line. Bigfoot though is going to be the truck that's going to be at the finish line first. He walks all over Texas Toy right here.
It's a beat down.
On paper, there is no way in heck Bigfoot's going to lose this. And physically, when you watch the race, Bigfoot is literally jumped and landed on the cars before Texas Toy even reaches them.
Yeah, this race goes this way 10 out of 10 times. The only reason I'd say maybe 9 is because there's a mechanical issue.
Yeah.
If there's no mechanical issue, there's no way. I mean, this is about I won't say as mismatched, because Texas Toy did okay in some of these rounds, but man, you're just on this kind of track too, especially, there's just no time where you have Bigfoot 4 and its big power and setup just smoking the toy.
Man, nothing against Texas Toy. That truck was not battle ready, as far as I'm concerned, to be out there and doing what it does. But one thing I do want to point out is not one person expected that truck to be in the final. One thing I do want to quickly talk about here is day 2 of this event. There's really not much of day 2 that's really filmed, because I don't really think there were many trucks left after day 1. We ended up with the same final in day 2 with Bigfoot and Texas Toy, and it's another Bigfoot just walks away with it kind of races. At the end of this, though, we get Bigfoot pulling right up next to Army Armstrong. We get a really good look at the engine, because you see Rich Hoosier does the flip hood on 4, which is something I miss.
Yeah, this is the flaunting.
You see the truck come up, and then he just flips that hood up, and you see those Predator carburetors right there.
It's this is like the victory lap, if you will.
Yeah.
It's always when it's over, after running out of the stadium really quick every time, which a lot of the trucks would do that, just leave quick. It was a quick, hey, it's like your glamour shot.
Yeah. Rich says here in his interview that he honestly expected it to be Mad Dog in the final. I don't know that he probably even knew what was happening until he drove out of the tunnel to see who he was racing in the final. He probably had no idea. He was just like, all right, cool, I'm going to go race. Then he gets out there and he sees Mad Dog's on the hook.
Yep.
And he's racing Texas Toy. I mean, in all honesty, I'm pretty sure Rich had probably at that point had to have a little bit of a grin on his face.
Oh, he knew he was winning. I mean, let's be real here. We're racers too. There are times and I'm sure that he was. If you just watch this event in general, it's shocking that Mad Dog isn't in there, because they're Bigfoot and Mad Dog are 2 trucks that are just cut above everybody at this event. Yeah, and it was surprised. I'm sure he was surprised. I'm sure he was really surprised that they're, what had happened, and it's kind of confusing even to the viewer what happened. But yeah, a lot of times those guys are strapped in the trucks and they don't know. They're called out for the finals, and yeah, I'm sure he's like, okay.
Yeah, he's like, all right, cool, I'll take him on. All right.
Yep.
But anyway, it's time for the review portion of the podcast here, and I'll go ahead and let you go first. Generally, rate it what you think this show was overall rating out of 1 through 10.
So for me, I would say 87 is tough to watch, personally. I love to watch TNT. I think it's some of the most entertaining monster truck racing you can watch is still 88 through 90 TNT.
Yes, I agree 100%.
Is fun. Almost every event is fun with great racing. This one, I would say I would give it maybe a 4 out of 10. I would rate it 4 out of 10. And probably 2 of those points are because of the Crimson Crusher and the Mad Dog thing. If not for that, it's kind of a forgettable event, I guess. It's just one of those when you know what's coming later. Even production-wise, as you said, it's kind of a mess. They're trying to figure out what to do.
It's a bit of a mess. It jumps kind of all over the place. But in fairness, so does Return of the Monster Trucks. There are a few cuts in there where you're like, wait a minute.
They do, sure. But in general, this early monster truck racing is not the early monster truck racing that we all necessarily look back on so fondly. I mean, I won't put that in everybody's mouth. I mean, that's just me knowing how, like, there are so many events that are like 8 or 10s in the next few years of TNT. They're just, even now is riveting watching them with some of the battles that go on. And you just don't have that here. You just don't have a lot of you don't have your Digger. You don't have your USA 1. You don't have your Equalizers. You don't have the Crusher or Carolina Crusher.
Yeah, you don't have the awesome lineup that you would have at a normal TNT event. And I think that's what downgrades it a little bit. My rating, you're actually a little harsher than me. I gave it a 5 out of 10. And the main reason I gave it a 5 out of 10 is because the wacky pairing of Army Armstrong and Dave Grimm to me still makes me chuckle. The fact that you have still what I believe to be the race of 1987 between Crimson Crusher and Mad Dog, Bigfoot establishing its dominance just like it did in 86, 87, all the way into 88. This truck was incredibly hard to beat. I think it only had, there are probably people out there that'll prove me wrong, but I believe going into 88, Bigfoot had only lost 2 races. And one of those races wasn't even really a race track. It was Philadelphia, and it was Virginia Giant taking on Bob Chandler, and Bigfoot won, and the track wasn't even even. The other race, Excalibur defeated it in Canada in a straight up race, which a lot of people don't remember because there wasn't anything but a home video camera that caught that event. Main reason I gave it a 5 out of 10 though was the seriousness that it did take with the rollover of Crimson Crusher. And almost at the end of it goes into a comedy aspect when you get Dale throwing his hands up in the air, goes, all right, who won?
That was great. Yeah, that was a great part when he asked who won, because it was a good race. And in general, that's the racer mentality, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the racer's mentality. And you could tell he knew he was probably going to be spending a lot of money. And that's the other thing too I want to bring up. That truck actually comes out the next night.
I don't recall if
it actually races, but he comes out and you see footage of this truck just completely demolished from night 1, and it's out there on the track. And to me, that's the biggest accomplishment of the weekend, was just, you know what? Hey, I may not be able to compete, but by God, I'm still out here on the track.
Yeah, sure. And that is really cool. Yeah, it's again for 87, I think it's a good event. I just put, the only reason I put, with mine, I guess rating it harsh on it, is because I know in comparison, there's a lot of other really good stuff that I think is really merits the high end stuff. Like, this isn't a race that there's sometimes to relax. I will put on just old monster truck stuff on YouTube. Now it's easy on YouTube. Back in the day, it used to be tape trading.
Yeah, but back in the day, you had to know a guy that knew a guy that knew a guy that could cross-record 2 VCRs together to make a VHS copy of an event that happened in 1987.
Yep. And so this isn't one with everything that's available now. How easy it is to find whatever event you want on YouTube or wherever. Yeah. It's not one I really would revisit much. But I'm that way with 87. I just watched the next 3 years. I enjoy so much, and I watched the next 3 years of TNT. That's probably my favorite monster truck stuff to watch on YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
Is the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's what I find myself binge watching. Like, if you and I are both RC racers, we both have nights where we're sitting in a workshop and we want something playing in the background, either whether it's just for noise or whatever. For me, generally it's always 1990 TNT. and
That's
I'll
when,
have that playlist on a loop, and I'll just sit there and watch every single one of those races. And whenever one comes up, I'm like, ooh, I'll stop working for a second just to pay attention to TNT.
yep, yep. Yeah, it's just exciting stuff. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to being on another one of these at some point here. One of the later events. Those would be a lot of fun to talk about with one of the all-star lineups, if you will.
Yep.
But yeah,
I'm
thank you
planning
for
on
having
doing
me.
after. Hey, no problem, man. Anytime. After this one, uh, obviously this has been a really cool episode. I'm glad you could join me. I really want to start getting into some TNT 1990s era stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've covered the USHRA event. Now I've covered a TNT event. I really want to get into a deep dive into one of my favorite monster truck events of all time. And that 1990, we're going to stick with Louisville, and we're going to go to one of the classic monster truck events of all time. But we're going to go to the figure eight, Louisville 1990 figure eight racing. If you haven't seen this event, watch it. Trust me, it is well worth your watch. Ladies and gentlemen, though, for this one, that's been the Retro Monster Truck Review. And as I always say, keep the rubber side down, keep the shiny side up.